The morning Renee served him the divorce papers, Harlan Cole was sitting at the kitchen table in a shirt that hadn't been ironed in 3 weeks, eating a bowl of cereal he'd already let go soggy. He didn't look up right away. He heard the slap of paper against the table, heard her breathing. That sharp, controlled kind of breathing she'd been doing lately, the kind that meant she'd already made up her mind and just needed him to catch up. He looked down at the papers. Then he looked up at her. She was dressed for work. Good blazer, hair done, the kind of put together she never used to be at 7 in the morning. Behind her, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed like he owned the place, was a man named Sterling Vaux. Harlan had met him twice, a real estate developer. Smooth handshake, cologne you could smell from across a room. "I need you to sign those today," Renee said. "I've already spoken to an attorney." Harlan looked back down at the papers. His daughter Mila was 9 years old and asleep upstairs. He thought about that. He thought about the way she'd asked him last Tuesday why Mommy was never home for dinner anymore, and how he hadn't known what to say, so he'd just buttered her toast a little slower. "I'll read them," he said. "There's nothing complicated in there. It's straightforward. I'll still read them." Renee made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, and picked up her handbag. Sterling pushed off the doorframe, smoothed his jacket, and gave Harlan a look that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite contempt. It landed somewhere in between, that look, the look of a man who had already won and wanted you to know it without having to say so out loud. The door closed. Harlan sat there in the quiet kitchen for a long time, spoon resting against the side of the bowl, cereal getting soggier. Then he got up, rinsed the bowl, and went upstairs to wake his daughter for school. He'd been living in that house for 6 years, a small 2-story in Clarkfield, Ohio. Decent neighborhood, nothing special, the kind of block where everybody knew each other's cars. He drove a 12-year-old pickup truck with a crack in the windshield he kept meaning to fix. He worked at a logistics company downtown coordinating freight routes, which was the kind of job that sounded boring because it was boring. But it paid steady, and he could be home by 5:30 most nights to make dinner. That was the version of Harlan Cole that Renee had fallen out of love with. The steady, boring, windshield-cracked version. What she didn't know, what almost no one in Clarkfield knew, was that Harlan Cole had, 7 years ago, quietly sold a supply chain software company he'd built in his late 20s for a number that had 8 figures in it. He'd taken the money, moved it into a holding company registered in Delaware under a name that meant nothing to anyone, and then done something almost nobody with that kind of money does. He'd walked away from it. Not forever, but for long enough. He'd had reasons. He always had reasons. The kind you don't explain to people, because they'll either think you're lying or think you're crazy. He'd watched what money did to his family growing up. The way his father's company had turned his parents into strangers to each other by the time he was 12. He'd watched friends from his early startup days change in ways they couldn't even see themselves changing. He'd started to feel it happening to him too. The subtle shift in how he looked at people, always calculating, always positioning, always wondering what they wanted from him. So when Mila was born, he'd made a decision. He would raise her the way he'd wanted to be raised. Present. Grounded. Without the weight of money distorting everything around her. It was supposed to be a chapter, not a life sentence. He hadn't counted on Renee getting bored before the chapter ended. The months after she filed were the hardest months of his life, and he'd had some hard months. She moved out and moved into Sterling's place in Columbus. Mila stayed with Harlan during the week, went to her mother on weekends. That arrangement had been Harlan's doing. He'd been the one who showed up at every school pickup, every parent-teacher night, every Saturday morning soccer game where Mila played left midfield with more enthusiasm than skill, and he cheered from the sideline in a rain jacket that was 2 sizes too big because he'd bought it on clearance. Renee's attorney was sharp. She pushed for a more even custody split, argued that Harlan's income was limited, that he couldn't offer Mila the kind of stability that, and this part Harlan had read twice, slowly, a household with greater financial resources could provide. He sat with that for a while. His attorney, a quiet man named Patterson, who worked out of a second-floor office above a dry cleaner on 5th Street, had asked him early on whether there was anything about his financial picture that the other side didn't know. Harlan had looked at the wall for a moment and then said, "Not yet." Patterson had raised his eyebrows but hadn't pushed. Harlan had his reasons. He still had his reasons. He just needed to get the timing right. The detail that ended up in Renee's attorney's filing. The one that stung the most, the one he thought about at 2 in the morning when he couldn't sleep, was about Mila's shoes. She'd needed new sneakers in October. Her old pair had a split in the left sole, the kind where it peels away at the toe and makes a flapping sound when she walks. He'd seen it, he knew. But that month had been tight. A mechanic's bill had come in unexpected, and he'd decided to wait another week or two until the next paycheck cleared. Mila hadn't complained. She never complained. She'd walked around for 11 days with that flapping sole, and at some point someone had mentioned it at school, and somehow that detail had made its way back to Renee, who had mentioned it to her attorney, who had put it in a filing as evidence of his inability to provide basic necessities. He read that paragraph 4 times in Patterson's office. Patterson watched him read it. "It's a tactic," Patterson said. "She's trying to establish a pattern. I know what it is. Do you want to respond to it directly?" Harlan folded the document closed and set it on the desk. "Not yet," he said. "I'll respond when I'm ready." He drove home that evening with the radio off. Mila was at the neighbor's. He went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where the divorce papers had landed, and opened his laptop for the first time in a long time to a set of accounts that Renee had never known existed. He stared at them for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called a man named Gerald Warren, his old CFO, who answered on the second ring. "It's time," Harlan said. There was a pause. Then Gerald said, "How long do you need?" 30 days. He didn't change anything about his life in those 30 days. He drove the same truck. He wore the same jacket. He packed Mila's lunch every morning and walked her to the bus stop and waved until the bus turned the corner. On weekends when she was gone to Columbus, he cleaned the house, mowed the yard, and sat on the back porch in the evenings watching the light change. He thought about his father. He thought about what it meant to teach a child something without ever saying it out loud. To show them, by the shape of your daily life, what you actually believed. He didn't know if he'd gotten it right. He didn't know if the 11 days with the flapping shoe had cost Mila something she'd carry forward into adulthood, or if she'd shrug it off at 15 and not remember it at all. He hoped for the second. He suspected the first, but he also thought about the other things she'd seen. Not the worn shoe, but the man who kept showing up. Who made dinner. Who learned to braid her hair badly, and then less badly, and then almost decently over the course of 2 years. Who sat with her through nightmares and science projects, and the week she came home from school crying every day because a girl named Courtney had decided she wasn't worth talking to anymore. He thought, I hope she holds on to that part more. The 30 days ended on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, a press release had gone out from the holding company's communications team announcing the appointment of Harlan Cole as executive chairman of Meridian Logistics Group, a consolidation of 17 regional freight and supply chain companies that had been quietly assembled over the past 4 years, now valued at just under $2 billion. By Thursday, his phone had received 47 calls from numbers he didn't recognize. By Friday, a journalist from the Columbus Business Review had published a profile piece with the headline, "The Invisible Architect." How Harlan Cole built a freight empire no one saw coming. The article mentioned Clarkfield. It mentioned the pickup truck with the cracked windshield. It mentioned, because Harlan had told the journalist this directly, that he had spent the last several years living quietly and deliberately because he believed that the way a person lived when they thought no one was watching said more about them than anything else. He had not mentioned Renee. He had not mentioned the divorce papers on the kitchen table or the filing about the shoes. He didn't need to. Other people would connect those dots fast enough. He was at the school pickup line in the truck when his sister called him. Her name was Loretta, and she had known about the money the whole time because she was the only person Harlan, trusted absolutely. And also because she had been the one to talk him out of doing something reckless with it in the first year after the sale, when he'd briefly considered buying a boat and moving to Portugal. "Are you ready for what's about to happen?" she asked. "Not really." "Renee has been calling Mom. I figured." Sterling's assistant apparently called Gerald Warren's office this morning trying to set up a meeting. Harlan watched the school doors open in the distance. Kids beginning to file out. "What did Gerald say?" "Gerald said Mr. Cole's calendar was full through the next quarter." He almost laughed. "Good." He saw Mila coming through the doors, backpack bouncing, looking around for the truck. When she spotted it, she raised one hand in a wave, the easy, unself-conscious kind that kids do before they get old enough to feel watched. He lifted a hand back. "I have to go," he told Loretta. "Mila's out." She paused. "You okay?" He thought about it honestly. "The way you do when someone who knows you asks." "Getting there," he said. The custody hearing had been scheduled before any of this, locked in for a Thursday 3 weeks out. Harlan's attorney, Patterson, had called the morning after the press release with a voice that was noticeably less measured than usual. "This changes things," Patterson said. "I know. Their argument about financial stability just. I know. Do you want to pursue a modification to the arrangement? Or?" "I want what I've always wanted," Harlan said. "Mila primary with me. Reasonable time with her mother. Nothing punitive. I'm not trying to take Mila away from Renee. I just want the record to be accurate." Patterson was quiet for a moment. "That's a generous position given everything." "I'm not doing it for Renee. I'm doing it because Mila loves her mother." He meant it. That was the part people would probably have trouble believing, but he meant every word of it. Whatever he thought of Renee's choices, and he had thoughts, ones he kept to himself and did not put in filings. Mila was 9 years old and she needed both parents functional in her life. Harlan had watched too many divorces turn into proxy wars as where the kids were the only real casualties. He wasn't going to do that. Renee called him directly the night before the hearing. He let it ring twice, then answered. She sounded different. Not the sharp, controlled voice from the morning of the papers. Something smaller underneath it now. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't. Why didn't you?" She stopped. Started again. 7 years, Harlan. 7 years and you never said anything. He sat down in the chair by the window. Outside, the streetlight was doing its usual thing against the maple tree, making leaf shadows on the sidewalk. He'd looked at that pattern 1,000 times. "You would have treated me differently," he said. "From the beginning. I've seen it happen. I didn't want it. That's not fair. You don't know that." "No," he admitted. "I don't. But I believed it, and I made a decision. I should have told you before we got married. That part was wrong. I know that." The silence stretched. "The filing," she said. "About the shoes. I didn't. My attorney wrote that. I told her the story because I was angry. I wasn't thinking about." "It's done," he said. "We don't have to go over it. I want you to know I don't actually think you're a bad father." He didn't say anything to that. "Mila talks about you constantly," she said. "Every weekend she's with me. It's dad this, dad that. You know she told Sterling he makes grilled cheese wrong because you don't use that kind of cheese?" He said nothing, but he pressed his lips together in the dark. "She's lucky to have you," Renee said quietly. "I think I forgot that for a while. I'm not sure what happened to me." "People change," Harlan said. "Sometimes marriages don't survive it. It doesn't make you a bad person." Another silence. Longer this time. "I won't fight the custody arrangement," she said. "Whatever you're asking for, I won't fight it. I'm not asking for anything extreme." "I know," Patterson told my attorney, she said. Renee stopped. She said it was the most decent she'd ever seen a man act in a case like this. Harlan watched the leaf shadows move. "Get some sleep," he said. "Hearing's early." The hearing lasted 40 minutes. Renee's attorney withdrew several of the contested points before proceedings began. The judge, a deliberate woman named Holloway, who had clearly seen every possible configuration of human marital failure, approved the modified arrangement. Primary residence with Harlan, regular scheduled time with Renee, a holiday calendar split evenly, and a clause that both parents would support Mila's relationship with the other without interference or disparagement. Standard language. Clean, quiet. Outside the courthouse, on the steps, Renee stopped beside him. Sterling was not there. Harlan hadn't seen Sterling in weeks, and there were rumors around their shared social orbit that things between them had soured fast once the full picture of Harlan's finances became public. He didn't know if that was true, and he didn't spend much time thinking about it. "Thank you," Renee said, "for not making it worse than it had to be." "Of course." She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she hadn't in a long time. "What are you going to do now, with all of it?" He thought about the question. "Run a company, raise my daughter, maybe finally fix the windshield on my truck." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost the laugh he remembered from a long time ago. "Take care of yourself, Renee." "You too, Harlan." She walked down the steps, and he watched her go, and then he turned the other direction, toward the parking lot, where the old truck sat in the third row with its cracked windshield catching the November light. Mila was with Loretta that Thursday. So when Harlan got home, the house was quiet in that particular way. Houses are when they're waiting for a child to come back to them. He went through the room slowly, not doing much, just existing in the space. He straightened her drawing on the refrigerator. A house with 4 windows, and a large, anatomically questionable dog in the yard, even though they didn't have a dog. He made a mental note, not for the first time, that they should probably look into that. His phone had a dozen messages. The logistics company, Gerald, a journalist, 2 old friends from his startup days who'd seen the news and were apparently now very interested in reconnecting. He set the phone face down on the counter. He made himself coffee, sat at the kitchen table, the table where it had started, the same chairs, the same window light coming in from the same angle. He looked at the spot where the papers had landed and thought about the man who'd been sitting here that morning. Tired, cereal going soggy, trying to figure out what to say to his daughter. He didn't feel triumphant. He'd expected maybe to feel triumphant or vindicated or some version of the satisfaction he'd imagined during the harder nights. Instead, he felt something quieter, like a door closing gently somewhere in the house, not slammed, just done. He thought about what Mila had asked him once, 6 months into the worst of it, when she'd come downstairs and found him at the table, after midnight, staring at nothing. She'd climbed into the chair across from him. Too big for her, she had to pull herself up, and she'd looked at him with that particular directness that children have before they learn to be indirect. "Are we going to be okay?" she'd asked. He'd looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," he'd said. "We are." She'd considered that. Then, "Okay," and climbed down and padded back upstairs. He hadn't known in that moment if he was telling her the truth or just saying what a father says. He'd needed to believe it was both. Sitting now at the table in the November quiet, coffee going warm in his hands, he decided that it had been. 3 weeks after the hearing, Gerald sent him a car for the first board meeting. Black Escalade, driver in a jacket, the whole thing. Harlan rode to Columbus in the back seat in his good suit, the one he'd had dry cleaned twice in 7 years, watching the Ohio landscape go flat and gray outside the window. The Meridian Boardroom was on the 22nd floor of a building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river. 12 people around a long table, all of them smart, all of them watching him walk in. Gerald was at the far end, nodding slightly, a greeting that meant everything was in order. Harlan sat down. Someone poured him water. Someone slid a folder in front of him. He thought briefly about the morning of the soggy cereal and the cracked windshield and the papers on the table, and Mila's left shoe flapping against the school hallway floor. Then he opened the folder, picked up a pen, and got to work. Later that year, in December, he bought Mila a dog, a rescue, medium-sized nervous energy. One ear that stood up and one that didn't. She named him Biscuit. He was not a particularly well-behaved dog, and he chewed through 2 of Harlan's work shoes in the first month, but he had the specific gift of making Mila's entire face change when she walked in the door and saw him. Harlan thought, some things you can't plan for. Some things just work out. The windshield on the truck, for the record, he did not get fixed immediately. He thought about it several times. He drove past the auto glass place on Meridian Street a dozen times through the fall and winter. But the crack was in the passenger's side, not the driver's side, and it had been there so long it had become a kind of landmark. Something that told him, every time he got behind the wheel, what the last several years had actually looked like. He got it fixed in January, the day after Mila's school soccer banquet, where she received a certificate for most improved that she carried home like it was made of gold and pinned to the wall above her desk that same night without being asked. He drove to the auto glass place the next morning. They replaced the windshield in 40 minutes while he waited in a plastic chair drinking bad coffee from a machine. When he walked back out to the truck and got in and looked through the new glass, clean, whole, no crack, he sat there for a moment with the engine off. Clear view, everything in front of him. He turned the key and drove home.